You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are that of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, Secular Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. How can I live in society if I don't believe in God? How can I understand the world around me without religion? What can I do to make the world a better place? Where did we come from? How can I be a moral person? These are just some of the profound questions we as humans have pondered for millennia. Join us as we ponder these questions free from the ideologies of religion and superstition. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. I'm your host, Andrew, and this is episode 6 of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. In this episode, we join D, Chris, and V in a conversation about education.
Sounds like education is a hot topic that we can discuss today for our viewers and listeners. D had a interesting discussion with his uncle. Was it uncle?
That was my grandfather.
Oh, grandfather, sorry. Please enlighten the listeners on what you guys were talking about.
Sure. Love my grandfather. He's taught me a lot, but I would say he's probably would consider himself a libertarian. If he had to pigeonhole himself, which is basically pretty strong free market rules. And one of the things he dislikes is the Department of Education. He's a big advocate for local communities running their education system across the board. And one of his big arguments for that is that the United States had this for 170 years. I think the Department of Education started in the 1960s. And the country did just fine. It grew. It was like the leading nation in the world. And so why would it be so bad to go back to that type of thing? And I had never really thought about the topic. And my first question was, well, what about schools that want to teach that the Earth is only 6,000 years old? Like the evidence and science has basically proven that that's a ridiculous notion. Can we really allow that kind of teaching to go on? And then a myriad of other topics that can be misrepresented or mistaught. And I haven't put a ton of thought into the topic, but I like the idea of having a Department of Education, and I think it probably gets rid of a lot of the terrible teaching. And I'm sure it has its flaws as well, but I'm curious as to everybody else's perspective on it.
You also mentioned that, part of his reasoning was to save money.
Yes. I looked up the budget. I believe the 2014 budget for the Department of Education was $77 billion. So that would be, if we were to totally eliminate it, which was his proposal, we would save $77 billion a year, potentially.
So that's probably an easier target for me to attack. You actually are probably going to cost society a lot more money, because now the same amount of work that's done by a handful of people in a department somewhere in Washington, D.C. would now have to be done by every individual department, whether it's at the county level, state level, city level, whatever. So now you're going to have, the hundreds of times more people doing the exact same work, and they're all going to be collecting salary while doing it. And I don't see that saving much money.
That's the thing, is that people often forget that many of these departments were created to consolidate and improve the efficiency of said systems. So if we're talking about the Department of Education, it's great having a few people do a whole lot of stuff, and those rules just be, almost allocated elsewhere, so to speak. Whereas if you have every individual in every district having to do those things themselves, basically reinvent the wheel at every single district, then you end up spending a lot more money just to achieve the same result. Which is why we have the Departments of Education and why we have the Department of Transportation, things like that. It's just more efficient to consolidate things into a larger system that can do each of those tasks all at the same time, all simultaneously, and have wide-ranging effects from just the actions of a few individuals.
And if you think about it, it's easier to find a few individuals that are really, really good at doing their job and put them in one location where, when you spread the same amount of work done across many, many, hundreds of districts, you're going to have some people that are better at it, some people that are worse at it, and you're going to end up with some places that are just horrible, and it that has the potential to carry over and screw up the lives of those kids for a long, long time in some of those areas, where other richer areas that can afford to pay for better, more educated advisors are going to have better programs. They're going to teach better things, and so see again, even further would grow the divide between the haves and the have-nots, maybe even.
Yeah, I could totally see that. There's got to be some interesting arguments against the Department of Education, or I think we were talking earlier was standardized testing and teaching to the test. My wife is a teacher. She complains about that a lot. Teachers are just teaching to the test, not necessarily worrying about making sure that there's good comprehension of a topic, good critical thinking skills, but just making sure that the kids are going to do as well on the test as possible. It affects their paycheck. It affects the way their school is funded, I believe, to some extent, and also how much the state gets involved in actually manipulating how the school is run. So there seems to be a real anxiety within her school, at least, on how well they do on these standardized tests. And that seems like a real downside to that, possibly.
Right. And so that was one of the things that has always been disappointing to me, being a college professor, as far as when students get to me, they seem to still be very inept when it comes to critical thinking and being able to independently think, as opposed to just copy paste whatever they're given. They still have no concept of plagiarism, which always bothers me, of course, because during my stint teaching high school, actually teaching chemistry in a high school classroom, I had about a third of the class that just thought it was okay to plagiarize all of their answers. And that's a problem, a big problem. And the fact that schools aren't teaching those sorts of things bothers me, because it doesn't prepare them for later on in life. Because you know what? Later on in life, we actually count on you knowing and understanding some things just in your own brain, without having to refer to Google, without having to refer to the textbook. Okay? And it's becoming an increasing problem, because we're requiring people to know more and more stuff, which starts getting beyond the capacity of the human brain to adequately absorb in a small time frame. So more and more often you're seeing kids resort to the internet because of the fact they're being slammed with all this material. They're being expected to know all this material, and it's sometimes breaking them, pushing them past the limit that they can already do.
Yeah, when you emphasize memorization over thinking, those are the wrong incentives. When you emphasize, doing good on the standardized test, time after time, and your teacher's salary depends on that, and how well your school does, and so many things depend on that, and those are wrong incentives. And incentives, they modify behavior in the wrong direction, in this case, in my opinion.
And it's funny because we've actually seen cases where they have indicted not only the principal of a high school, but the assistant principal as well, as far as actually cheating to trying to figure out what's on the standardized tests.
Yeah, I've heard some of these stories.
Diverting that information to their biology or science or math teachers or whatever, English teachers, and they've been fired from their jobs because they were cheating. And it's incredible that there's so much pressure towards these standardized tests that even principals would resort to that kind of low technique just to improve their test scores and improve their funding for the school through the high test scores.
Yeah, but you also have cases where, let's say, your school has a few, good teachers. They've implemented some good systems and stuff like that. So their students consistently score very high on these standardized tests. I think part of how things are evaluated is how much did they improve. So if you're already at near the top, it would be very, very difficult to improve. But you are at the top, so it's not as big of an issue for you, and that's another terrible incentive in there.
And the other thing that I've seen along those lines, just as the population of Spanish-speaking residents in the U.S. increase, is ESL classes and their performance. So English as a second language has become such an important determinant of what funding you get for those Spanish-speaking students and in the performance that they do in all classes at the high school level.
Now, Christopher, you've mentioned earlier that you think that the ability of students to think critically has declined over your time span, your lifetime. Your observations. Is that what you said? And what do you think we can do to improve on that? I mean, what really do they have to change to enlarge that skill in students?
I think a lot of that comes down to just trying to know and learn how to think, as opposed to just knowing the information or getting to know the information or knowledge that is required to pass the test. If you have to know that A equals 12 and B equals 10 and C equals 8, that really doesn't help you in life. Knowing that there is a difference of 2 between A, B, and C, that is power. That is knowledge. Just memorizing what A and B and C are is not. And I think that's a definite thing that people need to focus on when it comes to education and trying to prepare these kids for college. Because in college, they're going to be presented with a lot of facts, but they're also going to be tested on their ability to comprehend and critically think.
Now, Fort Wayne Community Schools has a basically a policy that you cannot hold a child back. You can recommend that a child be held back, but you can't hold them back. So you could fail every class and the child could still progress through school. I mean, that's kind of I don't understand that rule, but I also know that when I went to school, there were certain topics that I don't care what you tell me, I really just don't care enough to understand this topic in any depth. So in that particular scenario, I just glossed right through it. In fact, I feel like I glossed through most of school. It was very easy. I apparently had the gift of doing nothing and getting B's. And so, I pretty much relied on that. And I would imagine that it's very similar for a lot of kids. And then you have teachers who are stuck with all these kids in the class and they're just trying to get through a day. If the kids aren't showing interest in learning something in more depth, I mean, how do you persuade them to do it?
I mean, I'm sure there's techniques and things that teachers can do to engage the class to make it more interesting, but there are also limits to how much they can actually do. I mean, you have those kids for 40, 50 minutes in a period, you can only do so much, and those kids have to be motivated. We've passed all this responsibility onto the teachers, and I think we've taken it off of parents, for parents to actually get engaged and make sure that their kids do what they're supposed to and that they're engaged, and to follow up with them on a daily basis to make sure everything is happening the way it is. and not just to go around and blame and complain and all that.
And that's the thing. I've actually observed that phenomenon as far as parents calling in and complaining about their child's grade falling by 5%. And they're like, well, why did my child's grade all of a sudden turn from a 75 to a 70? And it's like, well, because your child didn't prepare adequately for the test. They stayed up late last night, and they were late to my class, and they all of a sudden performed at a 70% level. Look at that. That's not my fault.
Do you know?
How is that my fault? That's your student's fault. I'm sorry. So if that's something that they are doing, as far as they're in band, they're in show choir, they're in football, whatever their excuse is, that's not something that is my problem. That's a student's problem. If they can't balance that many things, they shouldn't be taking my class. And so when I get a phone call from you saying that your student is performing poorly in my class, I'm sorry. If my average test grade is around 70%, that's where it should be. And if your student is at or below that, that's not my problem.
Are you talking
the problem is on your end.
Are you talking about like college level courses or your experience?
No, I'm talking about my experience with high school level.
Yeah.
Even at the high school level, I get phone calls from parents of students that are like, "Hey, why is my student doing so horribly in your class?" And it's like, well, they're not doing well in their labs. They're barely even turning their labs in on time as it is. And so when you sit here and you try to say that, I'm being too tough on my students, well, if your students aren't performing at the average level, that's not my problem.
What do you guys think of, overloading the students with all these extracurriculars, like playing football, like, I mean, I didn't go through the U.S. high school system, so I don't know all the details, but I feel like if I had that, I would have never had enough time to study. Like if I had just two extracurriculars would have been enough to, knock me down whole letter grades in multiple classes in high school.
Well, and that's a great point as far as where you intend on being when you graduate. If you intend on being a football player, then certainly you should be focusing on football after school and on weekends and whatever. But if you're not intending on being a football player, if you're not intending on getting a football scholarship of some kind, then you really need to be focusing on your grades, period.
There is something to be said for athletics, and I'm sure other extracurricular activities, just pushing yourself to be excellent at something, pushing through the pain, pushing through the boredom, disciplining yourself to something. And sometimes it takes a sport or something that you love to do that with. And some kids don't necessarily find that kind of love or passion in a typical school curriculum. So I think that sports, piano, music, lots of extracurricular activities could substitute in providing kids with the perseverance just to live life as an adult that they may not get if they just were to study the traditional K through 12 curriculum without any extracurricular activity. But I don't know, that's a pretty gray area for me. I think once again it relies upon the parents being able to assess what their kids need and are capable of doing.
No, but you're absolutely right as far as extracurriculars being more geared towards what the student actually finds interesting, as either a hobby or a career. If they find it as a career, then they need to focus on that and less on schoolwork. If they don't find it as a career, then they need to try to focus equally on schoolwork and on their extracurricular. Otherwise, they will succeed at neither. So that is the problem.
Yeah, I mean, even if they don't want that thing to be, whatever their extracurricular activities are, when there's just too many of them, it becomes a problem. I mean, if you do, one thing one semester, another thing another semester until you find something you like and you stick with it, I'm cool with that. and I can see a lot of benefit to it. But if you're constantly, doing 2 or 3 things the entire time, that's pretty overwhelming. And it it doesn't give you time to do other things that you should do as a kid. Your entire life shouldn't be about school, extracurricular, school, extracurricular. There's more to being a kid than just that.
I would agree. My daughter is in kindergarten right now, and she has homework every week, and she's full-time kindergarten, and she's learning a tremendous amount, and she's able to do it. We spent a lot of time with her before, getting her prepared for school, and she just has the knack for it too. But to just jump into full-time kindergarten with homework every week, almost every night, seems a bit much to me. I mean, we don't have to do the homework, I guess, and we continue to do it because she likes to do it. But I think my younger daughter, she may not respond so well to that, and I'm not sure if I'm going to comply with it or not. But we'll see. I was a bit surprised at how intense kindergarten was, and I guess this is just the way it is now.
Just to give you a little bit of a point of reference, when I was growing up back home, 1st through 3rd grade, we were not graded. It was all pass-fail. We had no grades. It was only in 4th grade that they started to actually give us, actual grades. So that kind of got us used to, showing up to class. I mean, you still had some homework. You still had to do stuff. It was fairly easy to pass.
So it was similar for me as far as being here in the U.S. Just because of the fact that letter grades really weren't introduced until maybe 4th or 5th grade. Before then, it was simply a check, a minus, or a plus system. So there are basically 3 grades. Either you did well and you earned a plus grade, either you did okay and earned a check grade, or you did horribly and earned a minus grade. So you either earned an A, a C, or an F, essentially, at the lower elementary school levels. So I understand where you're coming from as far as that's concerned. And I believe that's appropriate because, honestly, as a kid, you need more experience than you need performance. And that's why when we start looking at recess times on those elementary school kids, we see a lot more recess time allocated for them because they need more playtime than older students do. Older students can do okay with a half hour of recess, but younger kids do much better with an hour of recess or more, just because they need that play. They need that social interaction to kind of develop their brains into the proper mode of thinking in a social context.
Agreed.
I don't know. My experience with school has been so different than, schools here in the U.S. I have some point of reference, but just the system was so totally different. I mean, for example, we had 2 shifts in school. So you either came in at 7:30 in the morning or 1:30 in the afternoon. Wow. And it switched. Some schools switched between semesters, and some schools switched every month. And, you went in at 7:30, 40-minute class periods with a 10-minute break. Then between 3rd and 4th period, you had a half hour. And then it was 10 minutes again, and you were out of there by 12:30 or 1:10, depending on, or 1:20 maybe, something like that, depending on how many classes you had that day. And we all went through, a fixed program where, all your classes were the same as everybody else in the country, basically, and you had a group of people that, of 25 students that we actually referred to as your class, and you went to all your different subjects with that same group of people. You never mixed much with other groups or other kids. It was a monolithic, group that you had of students. I don't know, just very, very different, very different.
That's interesting. Did you were kids held back, or when they failed, what happened?
If you failed 3 classes, you had to repeat that year. Doesn't matter how well you did in anything else. And there may be some exceptions, depending on certain circumstances. If there's some legit reasons or whatever, you may be allowed to move on. But in general, you fail 3 classes, it's an automatic repeat. No ifs, ands, or buts.
When I was a junior in high school here in the United States, I got expelled my junior year, so I couldn't go back to school for a whole year. Yeah, I was never a terrible kid, and obviously I did something pretty stupid. But anyway, they put me, this was here in Fort Wayne, they put me in the ALP program, which was the Alternative Learning Program. And obviously I was like horrified by this whole experience, but I ended up getting there, and it was independent study, work at your own pace. So I finished my junior year just by doing work at home that the teachers wanted me to do. And then my senior year, I did independent study, and I basically finished the curriculum for my senior year in 9 weeks with straight A's.
Wow.
Because I was allowed to move at my own pace. So I just, I read every single book. I did every single assignment. It was like the best environment for me, and I just gobbled it up, and I was done. And you weren't allowed to get out of school more than 1 semester early if you wanted to graduate early. So I had 9 weeks left, and they ended up letting me go back to school, but I didn't really need any classes, so I just took art the whole time.
Wow. Nice,
but
nice.
I was amazed at that experience, even though it was an awful experience for my family, how much I learned about myself just being able to work at my own pace, how much more I learned. When I look back at school, I just feel like so much of it was a total waste of time. I just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could have done so many other things that would have been more productive. It's hard to tell with that. I definitely got a lot of good things out of school, but I definitely don't feel like I learned how to think in school, K through 12. I had to get out on my own to do that. And when I think about it now and having kids myself that are about to go into school, I'm really very thankful for elementary school, but the time wasting got really bad about middle school on. And I hate to put my kids in that environment if that's the way it's going to be for them, but I'm not exactly sure what the alternatives are. So
Right. I mean, does anybody, aware of any alternatives other than like homeschooling, I guess?
I was going to say, my issue with going through elementary school myself was reaching 3rd grade and realizing that as far as science or health is concerned, I knew more than all my teachers. And at that point, that's when I turned to textbooks. So I was able to get some textbooks from the library. I was also able to get some textbooks from other sources, including some of my teachers, just to learn more about science and learn more about health. And it was that kind of initiative that resulted in me starting out high school with such a huge knowledge base just from the get-go. And so it really helped me at the high school level and beyond, even into college, just knowing all this stuff already. And I'm seeing a pattern where the elementary school and middle school teachers don't try to accommodate such needs as much as they should. They just try to accommodate what's expected of them. They try to accommodate the tests, of course, and they don't really see much need to accommodate much below that or much above that. And I see that as being a problem.
On that very same topic, and it kind of goes towards why having a Department of Education is actually a good thing, because they're trying to change it. But and it's been a while since I read on it, so I don't remember what the outcomes were. But there was a group of people, I believe, in the Department of Education. They were working on that exact same issue where everything is targeted to the average student. Where all the lessons, everything is just straight up targeted to the average, and it's like this race to the average, which it helps the students maybe that are not so good, but it also holds back the students that are really excellent and they're just bored out of their skull in that classroom and going into this snail space compared to what they can achieve. So there is a group, actually, the Department of Education, that's trying to figure out how to manage those type of kids and how to provide more options for them, more opportunities, more and that's the thing that I don't remember is like what were their recommendations, if they already came out with some or not. It's been a while since I read about that.
I would like to think, too, kind of on a tangent, that these problems probably only have another 30 years or so to go before they can actually tailor education specifically to the student. Maybe through computers, or I don't know how they would do it, but they would just kind of know, maybe from checking our DNA even, like what kind of things that particular person will be interested in, and then kind of form their education around the kind of person that they are and bring them up. And some kids will go further, some kids in particular subjects, and some kids won't go as far in that subject, but it could really find ways to just foster the individuality of each person and make them capable of a lot more, instead of the limitations of a single teacher teaching a class of 24 extremely diverse kids. But I'm really optimistic that that's going to come around the corner.
Oh yeah, I mean, technology is going to revolutionize everything in ways that we cannot even anticipate. Whatever we think is going to happen, it's going to be something different. It's going to be more, bigger, better in all of it. I'm a firm believer in that. And if it doesn't happen that way, it's our own fault for not doing it. I mean,
yeah.
We have amazing devices such as iPads and everything that can deliver knowledge in an entertaining and engaging manner to kids. And if we don't take advantage of that, we're really doing a disservice to the kids.
No,
Yeah.
but what's great about talking about this is that this actually reminds me of how useful it is and how nice it is for me to be in the position that I am, as far as being able to tutor students who are currently taking math at the high school level, or at a level where they're trying to get a high school degree. And a lot of these students are using what's called IXL.com to try to achieve those goals. And through this website, it's a very neat website, covers a lot of stuff. It's almost like Khan Academy, another website that I often frequent during my college education. But what's great about IXL is that it actually adapts to your skill level, such that if you answer a bunch of simple questions correctly, it will start giving you intermediate level questions. If you answer those all correctly, then you'll go on to answer very advanced questions. If you answer those correctly, it'll give you even harder questions beyond that. So it will adapt to what you are currently giving it in order to give you the most beneficial learning experience possible. And I believe that that's kind of the future, is adaptive learning and adaptive teaching, as far as grading what you're being given based on your previous responses. I think that's excellent.
That would be very interesting if you can actually tailor the lessons based on some questions that the student has answered previously, and try to bring them up to speed, kind of thing, or match their level if you can. That's very interesting. Wow, I had not heard of that. I mean, that's it kind of sounds like the GRE, actually, when I was taking it for grad school,
Right.
that gets
Funny
tailored
that.
to it. But if you can now take that adaptive concept and apply it to the actual teaching as opposed to just the testing method, I think that may have a lot of potential.
Heck yeah. You talked about the Khan Academy, and I have not actually gone on there for anything, but just recently, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I did worldscienceu.com, which is basically Brian Greene, famous physicist, teacher. He did. I took his course on relativity and quantum mechanics, or was relativity, I believe. Just relativity, explaining Einstein's theory for the layman. There was basically 2 courses. There was one for the people who don't understand the advanced mathematics, and then there was one where he just goes through the ideas and describes them real well. And I learned so much, and I just thought, this is amazing that I live in a time where I can be educated by one of the greatest teachers on the topic, and anybody can. And we just have so many resources out there available to just a common man to understand these any topic, really. And that's really just getting started. Apart from all of the tailored curriculum to each particular student. And I'm curious, Christopher, I mean, would you say that the internet has made, maybe you haven't lived long enough, has it made your students more knowledgeable, or has it dumbed them down since the internet has become more prolific over the last decade or 2?
As with many technological improvements, we have a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Right. So we have the advantages of Google, but also the disadvantages of Google. The fact that Google does not tell you what a carpal is as far as its relativity, as far as its relative nature to anatomy and physiology and biology. Okay. So when I have a term like carpal or tarsal or some other anatomical part of the body, we actually see that the students tend to just write whatever Google says. And whatever Google says doesn't necessarily attribute its relativity to this class. So if you say that a carpal is actually something that may be a wrist bone in a human, or may be the name for some other piece of anatomy on an insect, guess what you get in my class? 0 points, because you didn't answer the question in relatively to humans. So if you are not necessarily reading the question and understanding the context, you earn 0 points in my class. So you better understand what you're reading, or you better not write it down. Those are the 2 options in my class, which is why, apparently, why the leading grade in my class right now is a 75%. Because they're not paying attention. Because they don't care. Because they don't pay attention to what the context is within the Biology 101 class that I'm teaching right now. And so that's a problem. That's a problem. Students need to be able to tell what is relative to humans, what is relative to biology, versus what is not relative to human biology, which is what the name is in an insect. I don't care. This is not insect biology. This is human biology. Answer the question. You don't answer the question, you get 0 points. That's not my problem. Don't have your parents call me. That's not my problem. All right? Read the question and answer it.
I'm not going to take your class. You sound like I'm just not that interested in human anatomy. What do you teach?
I teach human biology. That's actually my Biology 100 class. Sorry. I just started my Biology 101 class, which is introductory to biology. So in that class, it would be appropriate to answer a question about some piece of anatomy as it relates to humans and other organisms, because of the fact it would be general biology.
That's interesting.
Biology 100, yeah. If you're not talking about humans, you clearly have no understanding of what you're writing, so you fail. as concept in my class.
So one thing that I was going to bring up since we brought up, online stuff. Have you guys heard of websites like Coursera or other websites where you can go and take college courses from actual universities and you can take them for free?
I
edX,
have.
edX.org.
I have heard of them. I have never actually done one though.
So Coursera is not free. I was actually just checking out their website, and I went on to just some engineering course, and it looks like there's 5 sections to it, and a project at the end, and it all costs you $300 basically, which is not bad, and it tells you how long each section is going to take. So, one section is 4 weeks. Let's see. Oh well, they're just one of them. Oh, one is 3 weeks, one is 4 weeks, 1 to 3 hours, and the rest of them don't really mention how long they would take. So I don't know. I think that's really interesting because it allows for people from all over the world to access. And this particular course is put by University of Boulder, Colorado, and I think actually it's probably very similar, if not the class that those students there that are studying engineering actually take.
Which university offers this?
Well, this is Coursera.com, but this particular course that I'm looking at is from University of Colorado Boulder.
Okay, yeah, UC Boulder.
So,
yeah, I figured.
Yeah. This is. I mean, this. I think there's actually classes from like MIT and like other. I think, and I know there was one website where, and I think you mentioned one, but there was one website that was actually free. That those classes were offered for free. This is paid. And you earn a certificate at the end, I guess, that you can show to people.
I would imagine that has to be. I don't know what the future of college is going to be. My wife and I struggle with how much money to save for college for our kids. That's going to be 13 years before our oldest is going to have to deal with that. And I'm like, I just have a hard time believing college is going to be the same thing that it is now. It's just changing dramatically already. It just seems like seems like a college education does not necessarily mean anything anymore. It doesn't mean that you've even educated yourself further than high school.
Well, and that's the unfortunate. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think you guys get the gist of it. As an employer myself, I don't care if you went to college or not. That's not what I'm looking for. The degree you have does not determine whether or not you are worthy of being hired. So I don't know what it's like for other people in that particular situation who look at college degrees, but I'm assuming that it's similar, that a general studies degree may not mean anything necessarily.
Well, it's just kind of bizarre is when you start looking at the formulas involved, you often see a relationship between 2 years of college versus 1 year of experience. And so you start wondering, why am I even taking college courses if I'm spending twice the time to earn half the knowledge or experience of actually doing that job? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
And I entirely understand that.
On top of the debt load that a lot of kids are taking on too.
Right, and that's the thing. Like if you're achieving graduate level degrees at the master's or at the PhD level, then when does it start not becoming economical for you to pursue those higher level degrees?
Oh, I'll tell you when you graduated $100,000 of debt, which yours truly did. So it has been very uneconomical for me. I got my bachelor's. I only had about $15K of loans. When I was done with my master's, my debt was over 100. Now, I have a good salary, so I've been able to pay that off. But man, if I was stuck with one of those jobs where, I end up getting paid like $15 an hour because I can't find anything better, man, I'd be so screwed.
Yeah, and you can't default on that debt. You can't clear it, right?
Yeah, you can default on it, you can't clear it.
Right. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they'll be all too happy if you default to garnish your wages and all kinds of other fun things they can
Yeah,
do.
you can never escape it. Golly, that's a real shame. And I would say, wasn't real happy with what I actually learned in college as far as like what to do with my life, but I did learn one thing, and that is what I don't want to do with my life. And I would say that was worth every penny I spent.
Yeah.
Not to be a biologist, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I actually initially went in for botany, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Yeah. So,
I mean, I'd say that for some of the more heavy technical and scientific fields, you definitely need to go to college. I mean, you can't just pick that stuff up with some on-the-job training. But there is certainly some majors out there that, especially like what you said, general studies, where it's completely undefined and everything. I mean, I don't know what value somebody thinks that kind of degree would have. I have no clue.
I mean, it has value. It's not guaranteed, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know if kids are going into college with any realistic idea of the value of the particular degree they're getting is going to have in the real world. So,
as an employer, I'd really have to look at every single course you took if you have a general studies degree, because I have no idea what you studied and whether you're qualified.
Right. Huh.
And that's what's cool about actually teaching a course, is that you get the opportunity to actually ask your students why they're taking that course.
Right.
Now, more often than not, you're actually, just getting the expected answer of, oh, well, I have to take this course for my degree.
Right.
But occasionally you end up across those students that are like, well, I took this as opposed to this class because I kind of wanted to learn more about biology than I did about some other field. And that's a little bit more promising. And I just went through that this week in particular, just because I started a new class on Bio 101. And so it's nice to hear these students coming into my class being like, hey, I chose this as opposed to philosophy because I felt biology would be more relevant to my life. And you know what? I hate to say it, but you're right. You're absolutely right. Because biology will teach you more about your life and about where you're going and about every single thing that you do every single day than philosophy would.
Yeah, but I
hate to say that
so much more.
I hate to say that, but honestly, when it comes to things like what I spent half my lecture doing this week, my first lecture with these new students, I spent half my lecture literally explaining cancer. Because a lot of them are concerned about cancer and how it plays into their lives and how it's caused and what they can do about it. A lot of people don't know that. So it's great for them to take Biology 101 just to learn more about that, because it's such a huge topic in today's world. Getting cancer and trying to treat it, that they want to know more about it and know what they can do to minimize their chances of getting cancer and what they can do to help future generations that get cancer.
Totally agree.
That would have to be a very interesting class, or at least topic, cancer. My wife is teaching a segment of her class on slavery, and she's reading a book. Cannot recall the name of it, but it's basically the account of what it was like to be captured from your home country somewhere in Africa, taken in, losing your culture, put on a ship, the horrid conditions, all the way over to the other side of the planet, and then what it was like to actually be a slave in that environment. And it's just like absolutely atrocious. And it's one thing to learn about that slavery existed and that it was bad, but it's another thing to actually learn like what something was like and the details involved with it. It just really opens up a person's mind, and I think it seems to interest the majority of the class when things go into more detail and one can empathize with the actual topic.
Mm-hmm. So is it more of a narrative then, like a kind of a? Is it more of taught as a story, or is it like a collection of facts? You know, this happened and that happened.
What do they call it? Like historical fiction? So I believe it's not a true story, but the story takes place under circumstances that would be considered actually happening at the time. So you get an idea of the environment that most slaves had to deal with in those times by reading the story of this one person, this one woman. So you get an actual idea of what slavery was like at that time. But the story itself is just fiction.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, just, since we're on the history subject, out of my home country, I've recently been very concerned that they're rewriting some of the history books, and, they're significantly altering some of the language and, remaking some terrible periods of history to sound more like it was, it wasn't really that bad. It was just a walk in the park and, that kind of stuff. I don't know. Have you heard of anything like that happening with like U.S. history, where, it used to be taught one way in the past and now it's taught in a different way, and, it may not be true or right or.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of stories like that. The one that comes to mind is like Christopher Columbus.
Oh.
Or just the story of the Native Americans of this country, how, we came over from Europe and basically took a lot of the people for slaves, wiped out entire populations. We came over with diseases, and those diseases spread across, North America, and basically wiped out the majority of the population. And then we just came over and took over their land.
Yeah.
Like that, there's just, those are relevant portions of the story that are often left out. That are relevant to appreciating history for what it is, instead of some guy coming over here from Europe and being like, wow, there's a whole other hemisphere of the planet that is free for us to take. Thank God. But
yeah, right.
Yeah, that's one of them
Okay.
that comes to mind. There's several things like that in American history that I don't think are given justice or not given the right context for appreciating the negative aspects of it.
Yeah.
Is that what's
I mean,
going
I guess
on over there?
Yeah, I mean, it's something like that. There's, my home country was ruled by the Ottoman Empire for a long time. And, that period used to be referred to as, being enslaved by the Ottoman Empire, because, there was actually a special word for people that were not, Muslim. And they were kind of treated as somewhat less than human. And, now they're altering the books to say something along the lines of, Ottoman presence or Ottoman cohabitation. How do you go from enslavement to cohabitation?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's just mind-boggling, and other stuff like that. I mean, I'm not there to get into and figure out what the details are. That's kind of the thing that most people get enraged about. But I can only imagine what other stuff they're changing in those books, and how are they rewriting the history, and for what reason are they doing that?
Do you know the reason why they're doing that?
There's all kinds of conspiracy theories, everything from, the politicians being bought off by the current Turkish government, and Turkey being the modern version of the country that followed the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire fell apart, it became Turkey. So, all kinds of weird conspiracy theories that I frankly wouldn't be that surprised if some of those were true to at least some degree, because I can just see no other reason why anyone would do something like that.
I gotcha. I haven't lived long enough to know how long grudges are held between countries, but my almost 40 years on Earth, some grudges seem to stick around for a really, really long time for reasons that don't necessarily seem apparent. Yeah, and the grudge seems to dictate how we view interactions between those countries. They just automatically are tinged with a negative light, and then it's hard to move past them. But I wonder if these things just go on for centuries sometimes.
It's interesting why now is also a very interesting. They didn't do it for since 1990, and now in 2016 they decide to rewrite those books.
Yeah.
It's just interesting timing. I don't know how tied it may be to other events, in that corner of the world. I don't know.
Yeah. I really don't know how much I've vetted the history that I do know, and if it's accurate. I mean, who knows? I don't know.
It's true. I mean, one thing that I can tell you for certain, I guess I can say I'm from Bulgaria. Our next door neighbor is Macedonia. And if you read the Macedonian history books versus the Bulgarian history books, there is some stark differences as to how different events are being presented and things like that. So, every country is going to spin the history a little bit and, make them out to be the good guy and, present their point of view. But when it becomes, so into your face and, to the point where you can't even trust as if anything is true. But on that note, I think we're about out of time.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and Secular Fort Wayne on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.